In this video, I want to talk about how the line that we are using can affect the number of bites that we get. This is something that at times I feel like a lot of anglers just kind of glance over, or it kind of goes under the radar, and it's something that can truly impact the number of fish that you catch when you go out there. I have some really interesting stories, things that have happened to me, and some things that have happened to some friends of mine that really all revolve around the line that we use. So stay tuned. I think it's gonna be a good one. Now, real quick, before we get into the video, guys, I do wanna let you know that until the end of January, I'm still running a sale on my USA-made sun shirts. If you buy one, you get the second one for 50% off. It's basically 2 shirts for around $81. Again, these are USA-made. It's one of the only ones on the market. Most sun shirts are made in China, Pakistan, overseas. Not that that's terrible, but it's always awesome supporting the USA. It's something that I'm really proud of. So click those links down below for fin fishing. All right, let's get into this video. Now, this was actually brought up to me by a buddy of mine. His name is Matt. He has a YouTube channel called Bred for Bass here in Ohio. I will actually put that down below as well. And he had this super interesting story to me. It's something that you may have also experienced as well. And it really just kind of he really just brought this topic up to me, and I'm like, I need to talk about that. So long story short, he was fishing with another buddy of his on Lake St. Clair up in Michigan for smallmouth a number of years ago. And what had happened was that his buddy who he was fishing with had caught 13 bass before Matt had caught a single fish. And they were fishing this large flat. They were both throwing the exact same bait, a tube. And there was really no reason, it's not like they were working the bait drastically different. There was no reason why his buddy should be 13-0 up on him, because they kind of have equal opportunity when you're fishing this giant flat to catch a bass. So they started obviously looking at their baits and examining, probably thinking, did I grab a gasoline or something on my hands and rub it on my bait, before this? I don't know. I'm sure they were thinking those thoughts, but long story short, the buddy of his that he was fishing with was using braided line to a fluorocarbon leader, whereas Matt was using just straight braid. And it was a very thin braid. I think it was only probably 10 or 15 pound test, so a very small diameter. He was fishing it around grass, so he thought, you know what, this probably doesn't really make a big difference. And lo and behold, it made a giant difference. And so long story short, he went on to attach a fluorocarbon leader to his braid, and on the very first cast, he caught a smallmouth. And not to mention, after that, in the next 15 minutes, he said he caught 5 more. So this just goes to show you where a simple tweak in the line that you are using can really affect the number of bites that you're getting. Now, this is kind of an extreme opposite end of, or this is like an extreme, I don't even know what I'm trying to say. The difference between braid and fluorocarbon is huge, right? Like you can visibly see it, and obviously the bass can also see it. But there's also some really minute details in the lines that we fish that can also cause us to get more bites or less bites at times. And I want to talk about a few stories that have happened to me out on the water. Now, the first one actually comes to fishing heavy braided line down in Florida. And this can apply to you no matter where you are fishing in Florida. But I was fishing with my uncle. My uncle is a great fisherman. He lives down in Florida. And I'll try not to make this a long-winded thing, but we were basically doing the same thing. We were flipping grass. Grass was all around us. He was catching them way better than I was, and I was not catching them that great. So what we found out is that he was using not only a lower pound test braid, but also a higher carrier braid. Okay, I was using my Power Pro line, which I love so much. Power Pro is a 4 carrier line. He was using one that was either 7 or 8. The big difference here is that when he was flipping and pitching, that bait, when braid hits grass, like lily pads, and we were flipping a lot of Kissimmee grass, it makes a noise. When you're yo-yoing it into the water, it will make noise as it is hitting that grass, that braid does. And you could hear it like with your rod. Now, when you're using a higher carrier braid, like the 7 and 8 carrier braids, that noise is greatly reduced. It's a lot smoother line and it's greatly reduced. Where I was using, you know, my 4 carrier, which actually made a lot of noise as I'm rubbing it against the grass. And that was what the story of the day was he was getting about 3 or 4 bites to my 1. And we basically think that it was because of that. So ever since then, whenever I'm flipping and pitching heavier cover, I like actually very high carrier braid. I like one that is a lot more silent in the water. And it's basically because of that experience that I had. Now, does this always impact your fishing? No. And just like Matt's story, there's times where you could use straight braid and it's not going to impact your fishing. It is on those days where things are either highly pressured or the bass are just a little bit more sensitive to whatever reason. And those are the days when it does make a big difference. Now, when you fish by yourself, it can be hard to see these differences because you're fishing by yourself. Now, when you fish with someone else, this is where you really see how big of a difference it can make. Now, the other thing that can really impact your fishing is actually the thickness of the line that you're using. And this is something that I've seen a lot here in Ohio, is that typically the smaller pound test that you can get away with, like if you're using fluorocarbon or monofilament, typically the more bites that you're going to get. Now, growing up, I thought that the bass couldn't see that line as well, and so that's why you got more bites. But it's not that. It's more or less that if you're using 15-pound test on a Texas rig, which is kind of my standard, that Texas rig is going to look a lot more natural in the water as opposed to if you're using 20 or 25-pound test. This is the same thing with a drop shot. If you use a drop shot with, 12-pound test, there's a big difference if you go down to 8 or 6-pound test. That bait doesn't have as much drag. That piece of plastic isn't kind of dragging along that line, and so therefore it looks a lot more free in the water, and that more natural action tends to get you more bites. So there's a lot of other situations where the line that you're using can impact the fishing, but I just wanted to talk about the few things that I have seen. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe, and I will see you tomorrow.